Just curious where people are calling in from.
Vancouver, Washington, just by
Welcome.
Portland, Oregon.
Orlando, Florida.
Phoenix, Arizona.
It's Arizona.
Welcome.
Portland, Oregon.
I'm also in Portland.
Amelia Island, Florida.
No one from the east, no one from the northeast, though.
Hershey, Pennsylvania.
There
New
you
York
go.
City.
All right, you are the winner from Hershey. I was originally from, born and raised in the Philadelphia area, so I have fond memories of Pennsylvania.
I heard New York City.
Okay, welcome, New York.
Thank you.
Chicago.
Hello.
Chicago, all right.
So welcome. So a few people will hopefully be joining in. We've had a pretty good sign up for this session. This is a series that we're doing. We have a group of ex-Intel facilitators. There's about 15 of us that we all have our own consulting and coaching businesses. We've been doing these types of things for our clients. And what we wanted to do as we meet each month with our consortium, we wanted to offer some of the things that we're doing for our client to all of our clients together collectively. So we brought a group of experts together. This is designed as, we're calling it not a webinar, and this is really for you to really help managers be successful. And today we're going to talk about exploring trust, culture, and connection during the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all experiencing. So hopefully we can share some things with you, and you can share some things with each other so that this adds some value today that you can use to help you with your success, hopefully as a manager. So our agenda for today, we encourage you to take notes and we'll make all of this information available to you after the webinar is done. So first of all, thank you for joining. We'll do a quick welcome here. You're going to hear from who is on the line today in a minute or two. Talk about the objectives for this meeting, this type of forum. We want to do an introduction to our expert team that we have on the line today. And then we're going to talk about a subgroup process. So we're going to break you out into separate groups. And during the groups, the 10 minutes that you're going to have in the separate groups, we'll walk you through a process that we've been using with our clients, and hopefully it'll work for you, where you'll get an opportunity to connect with other people that are having some of the same challenges that you are, and you can share as much or as little as you would like. The intention is to kind of kickstart question process so that you can bring that back into the bigger group, and then we will put the experts online with you that we have here in the session today to get some tips, and also open it up for a group Q&A. And then we'll close today, and our promise is to get you out of here at least 5 minutes before the hour. Two very easy objectives for today. The first thing is, we've been providing insights to all of our clients, and we wanted to reach out beyond that, really just to help during this time, because many of us are struggling, and many of our staffs are struggling with the COVID-19 or working from home. So we found a whole suite of tools, about 20 of them. And what we thought we would do is we'd try to take a topic each week and offer that to you. And then at the end of this, you'll get an invitation for next week's topic as well. And if you'd like to join or expand this to friends and family and colleagues, we would encourage you to do that. And the second thing is we wanted to connect the participants that may have some similar challenges. We found working with our clients that making that connection, whether it's internal or external with other people to talk through things, that quite often they can learn as much from each other as they can learn from experts. Speaking of experts, here are our experts. I'm going to let first expert introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Carl Ann Ferguson. Nice to see you all. And I am owner of Propel Forward. I do a lot of executive coaching, and I'm expanding that into coaching other people as well. So it's been an interesting time with COVID because I also am a speaker, but that of course has been pushed out. So the executive coaching continues, but the speaking part has been pushed out. And also with COVID, you have a lot of people going, well, maybe if we have our conference next year.
Thanks, Carl Ann. And then I'm going to pass it on to Trina.
Yeah, hi, I'm Trina D'Amico and founding principal of Development for Nerds. And so my business focus is particularly, the niche is working with technical professionals working on leadership skills. And so like Carl-Ann, there's a lot of things that have been put on hold right now. Well, seeing if we get to open up or if we all just need to learn virtual as our main skill going forward. So it's an interesting development time, I think, for all of us, but glad to be here on the call today with you all.
Thanks, Trina. I'm Kevin Gazzara. I'm the founder and senior partner at Magna Leadership Solutions. We provide Leadership Academy, different leadership programs for organizations around the world. Our goal is really to kind of help facilitate kind of the greatness that happens within every company to try to pull that out of the managers and leaders. So I'll be the facilitator today. And I'm also the moderator for our ex-Intel Facilitator Forum. I've had the pleasure to work with Carl-Ann and Trina and about a dozen other people. So we wanted to bring them all together in a single spot for you. So let's talk about the breakout that's about to happen. First, here is the process. So if you want to take some notes, because you're going to end up in a room with a minimum of 3 people and possibly 4 people. And what we're going to ask you to do is just quickly introduce yourself. You can release as few or as little details as you'd like about yourself to the others in the room. And then I'd like to ask someone to volunteer to kind of lead the discussion. We're going to give you about 10 minutes. And if you haven't used Zoom breakouts, they're really quite interesting. So everyone will automatically break out into random groups. And then about 1 minute before, you'll get a notice in your room. We'll say that you have 1 minute left. So it'll do a 60-second countdown for you. And if you are in a room with someone that is doing only audio, please let them know when the countdown happens because they won't be able to see it. And then we'd ask the leader or the volunteer that's kind of running the subgroups here is to give each person just a minute or two. And what we'd really like you to talk about is what are the 1 or 2 impacts to trust, culture, and connection, the topic of today, that you've seen at your workplace during this particular period of COVID-19 as we've kind of gone into the lockdown. And then capture 1 or more questions for the next discussions with the experts. So come and challenge us so that we can share our best known methods with you. Then hopefully you can share those with your colleagues and your organization, and hopefully it will help you as well. Let's do the breakout. What we'd like to do right now is to just capture questions, observations from the breakouts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just talk to different people in each of the breakouts. So we had, in group 1, we had Connie, Corey, Mike, and Tom. Trina is going to be good enough to capture questions. For this process, we're going to capture any kind of questions or observations that you had. We'll take some notes, and then we're going to turn it over to the experts, Carl-Ann and Trina, to answer the questions, and of course, make it available for anybody to jump in. This should only take about 5 minutes. So give us the questions first, and then we'll come back and answer them individually. So from group 1, Connie, Corey, Mike, and Tom, what questions do you have for us?
Okay, so you're not going to talk about lead the discussion about the impacts of culture and trust and all that?
We are. We're just going to Mike. We're just going to capture any questions that came up in your room to make sure that we cover what you're looking for.
Nominated or volunteered to be the spokesperson. So we had basically 2 questions. One, the tools that are available to help build trust. What tools might be available? Okay. And then the second one is the different means of communicating. This might be a subset of the first one, but what, let's say, non-standard tools of communication could the experts recommend?
Great. Okay, we'll certainly answer those for you. In group 2, we had Brett and Brent, Rona, Sunit. What questions can we answer for you?
Well, I guess the questions we sort of discussed and then we went into our a little deeper dive was how the form and the magnitude of communication that's happening right now in terms of long emails or long meetings, how that's affecting trust and the interplay of dynamics between team members and across an organization.
Okay.
and how it leads to fatigue.
Okay, thank you. In the group 3, we had Kevin, Paige, Rita, Sophia. What can we answer for you guys?
This is Paige, Kevin. We didn't get that far because we were trying to get each other's backgrounds. I guess I was under the impression, maybe and mistakenly, that we were all from the legal area, which we are not.
Right. Yeah. We tried to mix it up for you.
Yeah. So we really talked more about what each of us did and how we're kind of coping with the stay-at-home requirements and what have you. We had 2 from the East Coast, and then we had Rita from Houston and here in Chicago. So we have a couple of us that are, still in lockdown pretty much till the end of the month or mid to end of the month, and others that are opening more soon. And so we didn't really get to questions. I apologize.
What we'll do is during the session, because we still have plenty of time left, during the session is if there are questions that come up from anyone within your group or anyone here, we'll have time to do that after we get the ones that we've captured. And let's go to the last.
I was in with Jeff Skipper and Jennifer Montgomery, and we actually did not capture any questions. We got through part of the sharing.
Okay, good. Well, hopefully it was a good experience for you. At this point, what I'd love to do, I'm going to turn it over to our experts here. Trina and Carl Ann have been the ones that have been working most frantically on this.
I really like the statement question too about the fatigue, the long emails, the long meetings, everything that's going on. And just to, we're aware of how much it's impacting ourselves, that work day. If you're working an 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or whatever you're working, that at the end of the day, you're more tired than you were before when, pre-COVID. And that is because I want you to think about anxiety very differently, that anxiety equals the perceived threat being greater than what we perceive as our resources. And that this is different. This is very different for people because this threat has 3 components. It's invisible, it's invasive, and it's intense. Most of the time with the threat, we can see it, and I live in Florida, so I'm going to give you, hurricanes. Like we had the category 5 hurricane headed to us last year. And at least you can see it. You can track it. You know when it's coming. COVID, you can't see. You have no idea. Like, I go to the grocery store and I'm like, did I pick it up? I don't know. I wore gloves, but I could have brought it. I can't see it. It doesn't have any glow to it. So our anxiety gets higher with that. And then it's evasive. It's permeating all of our messaging, right? It's the first thing we hear in the morning. A lot of companies are doing these early morning calls with everybody, which is good in some part to say, here's where we are with it. But it's just all the time, and it's on our minds, and our friends are talking about it. And I don't even bring my personal phone into my office with me because my friends are so busy, chatting. And it's invasive. And then it's everywhere. We don't know much about it. The intensity is extremely high. It's loud. It is very loud. So our perceived threat is high. And I was just reading something from the expert who actually was on the forefront of predicting the pandemic and everything, who's a Harvard medical expert. And she was saying she expects this to go in waves for 3 years, right? So it's not going away anytime soon. So then if you look at our perceived threat, is it greater than our perceived resources? Yes, because our perceived resources include information, integrity, and initiative. And right now we have information, but it's coming from all directions. We don't know which source to trust. Right. So a lot of us are trying to figure that out for some means of control. So we go out and we go, which scientists do we want to listen to? What do we want to hear? And then do we have a leader with integrity who's really giving a clear sense of direction? And that's been kind of all over the place. Right now, it's the governors are all responsible. And I know in Florida where I live, even with the governor going, yeah, let's open it all up, each of the counties gets to make determinations. So where I live, you have to have a mask on if you go outside, but the county that's just across the street, literally across the street, they don't. So, and then, is there anybody taking initiative, setting direction? So this lack of control that we have is exhausting because we're trying to take all of that onto our own shoulders. And so when you have all of this going on, the fatigue is so much higher than we expect. But we're professionals, so we expect that, we can control this because we're used to controlling everything. And this just is not the same. This is something that really isn't within our control, right? And, like for myself, my means of control is I'm waiting for three things. I'm waiting for either a vaccine, a cure, or a way of telling if I have an antibody. All three of those aren't available, right? I don't know the timeline for when they will be available. The information is all over the place, right? And we don't have a cure. We have something that helps right now, but it's not a cure. So there's just, well, should I stay in? I'm getting sick of staying in. So you have all of this fatigue going on. So that thing about long emails, long meetings, it is true. Be really careful how much you're giving to people. How much can they really take when subconsciously their mind is still on all of these components that are coming into this, where we are today with the pandemic? Really looking at that. Now, Trina, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I just read an article yesterday through HBR, which has some great resources. Their COVID articles are currently free, so we're going to give you that link at the end of this presentation. But one of the things that I read yesterday was it's helpful to put together a matrix. So this would be under what tools are available. But their suggestion was to build a matrix of different communications for your different audiences and to really get strategic about how do you want to communicate to the different people that you need to, partly to address this fatigue issue, so that they're very targeted and people know what to expect on some regularity of what kind of communication will be coming in what format when.
Yeah.
And let me piggyback on that, Carl Ann, with Trina. When we've looked at leadership, we found that the most important thing a leader can do is be exceptional in communicating. And what we work with our clients with is we give them three elements. If you want some tools here, trying to look at the other questions. The first thing is, for the meetings, they have to get crisp, right? So when you're communicating, we use a three-part communication: quantity, quality, and pace, to make sure it's specific rather than general. That always seems to help to get you to the place that you want to get. And then the other tip that in some of the research that I've done to piggyback on what Trina said is that, establishing some type of normal process. So as Carlin, as you pointed out, that limiting that bombarding of information allows your brain to process things. So create this habit, create routines, limit the amount of intake that you have, and you can move forward.
Yeah. And for the group, comments back on what I just showed, if you want to go back to that slide again. Any comments on that about why this is different?
Well, I think you raised a couple of different points there, but I absolutely agree that it, unlike a hurricane or something else where you can see it coming and it's here and when it's passed, we all have this elevated level of anxiety, and some of us it's much worse than others. That means that our threshold, our bucket, if you will, is already 3/4 of the way full. Then you throw on top of that long, complicated emails or long staff meetings where there's a lot of information to process, and we all feel exhausted. I know speaking for myself, I'll come out of a staff meeting that'll run an hour over, and I just want to take a nap. I'm like this is just and not that anything important or urgent was really covered, but it's just when you're already operating at I'll say 80% because of all the other news and everything else that's coming in, these extra bits are they're exhausting, they feel overwhelming. And I think that although everybody collectively speaking, and I see this with with Maricopa Community Colleges, and I see this with my friends, and I see this with my kids' schools, they're trying to share information that they think is relevant and important, and they tend to not condense and not synthesize and not provide just a synopsis that's relevant. And instead you get these long emails or long meetings that was fine maybe in week 1, but we're in week 7, 8, 9 of this, and it just becomes too much.
Yeah.
If I could add to your comments, I think this is a great slide as far as taking us through an explanation of where the fatigue and anxiety comes from. It comes from the anxiety. it reminds me of one word that I picked up on. It's the idea of coherency. And the World Health Organization had a great piece they put out about you have to react very quickly, and it has to be integrated with your community, and it has to be coherent. And this idea of coherency does not feel like the order of the day here. There's just too many different hands in the fire. And that's really, I think, where our challenges come as an organization, is addressing the messaging that's counter to what we're saying, right? As we're getting different counties that are issuing different rulings, like you suggested.
Exactly. There's an article we'll send out to you afterwards that actually takes this and flips it to what are you as a leader, how can you create these different pieces of control for people. And I've taken some of those and put them in the other diagram in a different format. Kevin, if you want to go to that. You know, you're right about how this really is very different. It's exhausting. It really is exhausting for people. So how can you set up something where your communication is more succinct? And that just in itself is a great tool. Make it more succinct, right? Just like Brent said, just like you both said, make it more succinct, right? It's too much. And I akin it to, I was a manufacturing manager at Intel as well. And I akin it to that people aren't talking about this like they would safety, right? So I want to know if, as in a company, is, you know, what are you doing to make sure that we're safe? Because that's going to be something that's especially nerve-wracking if you're asking us to start coming back into work. So what are we doing to make sure people are safe? And then, you know, celebrate each day that you're COVID-free, just like you would in Intel, we called it incident and injury-free. We would, you know, talk about that on a regular basis. I think some of us are trying not to talk about it. Now it's like, okay, maybe people are overwhelmed. I don't want to talk about it. But there's still that fear of, am I going to get it if you're asking me to come back to work? So I think if your company is thinking that way, they need to be thinking about, okay, how do we make sure we kind of have these safety pass downs? And we all know what we're doing and we know how we're handling this. This next one, legal considerations, is obviously you need to work with your HR team, your legal team, or if you're, you know, a consultant like myself, be up to date on the rules and regulations of how can you communicate, but what's happening to team members.
Before we go any further, if I may interject something.
Sure, Michael.
One of the things that I'm not hearing is the relative level of intensity versus the level of communication. So for an example, I live on this idyllic island. My wife and I can walk on the beach for 5 miles and maybe see 100 people, okay? On the other hand, if I'm a meat packer and I'm shoulder to shoulder with somebody, the perceived concern is, you know, exponentially higher. And so I think that one of the things that you want to consider when you're communicating with people is what's the level of intensity that they're facing. You know, going back into an office where you have your own private office or a cube or something is one thing. Standing shoulder to shoulder with 150 people in an environment that makes Dante's Inferno look like a walk in the park is quite another. And I think the level of communication there, not to mention the level of ability to receive communication, has got to be factored in.
No, you're right. And one of my clients is a global customer service. So they've got a lot of call center agents, and they quickly got everybody working from home, but not in all countries. In some countries, they required them to stay. The company didn't, but the country companies were requiring them to stay because they said they're essential. And so they had to create these barricades up and make sure that the cubes were far enough apart. But then the concern is the air conditioning, right? Because it's in a very hot country. And, you know, and so you have to be constantly talking to people about what you're doing to maintain and to be celebrating that, you know, people are taking safety, not just at work, but they're taking it at home to ensure they don't bring it in. And it is a higher intensity. One of the other things you bring up is your own personal intensity. And I'm going to drop down here to number 5, which is calm, is be careful of your own intensity if you're the leader. And I say breathe. if we're intense, it's fight or flight behavior. And so we're hyperventilating. And as soon as we take those deep breaths, we tell our brains, the amygdala, to jump out of it, that we're not under attack and we can go back to normal thinking. Breathe. Don't push people too hard or too fast for major changes, because as leaders, a lot of times we're like, okay, I've got to quickly get to where I'm headed, what we're going to do, and we push too hard. And I had a client who is a CEO who was pushing his team way too hard. He's a high visionary. And I just had to say to him, look, you're a high visionary. You want to figure out how to make a better tomorrow, but you're pushing it too fast and too soon. Your team's not ready for that. Chunk it down, right? Put it into just a step where they can get to the next step and be successful, and the next step after that, because that long-term vision that might have worked for this company in the past with him as a leader is just not as effective right now. They're feeling overwhelmed.
Carlene, we've got about 9 minutes left. There's one or two more questions that I want to make sure that we get people off to their next meeting. Anything additional to close this visual? In fact, everybody
and we'll
will
give
get
this to
copies
you.
of this.
Yeah.
Questions? I have a couple. Notes.
So I had what tools are available to build trust? What are different means of communicating? So we've talked about that a little bit. How does the form and magnitude of communication lead to fatigue? Why is that, and what to do about it? So those are the main questions that I captured that we have briefly talked about, but maybe more things. I checked in with one of my former coworkers from my former company, and one of the things I was a bit impressed with on this intensity thing is the executive director is actually giving encouragement to his management team that if people are producing at about a 70% level through this time, he's actually fairly comfortable with that because he realizes people are dealing with parenting, with having to become teachers, of their kids at home, with partners having to work from home together, sharing duties that they're not normally used to. There's just so much stuff coming at people that coming from a senior leader to say, this is okay, we're not going to hold people to the exact same level of accountability that we do in normal times, is helping people breathe a little bit, especially as they're asked to take furlough days and any number of other things that they just aren't even available as much. So something to consider whether that can work for your company or not.
I was going to say, we're going to share this. So if you have questions afterwards, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer those as well.
You'll get our contact information at the close in about 7 minutes or so. With regard to the questions that Trina had posted here with regard to tools and communications, we use DISC, the behavioral assessment, to help people communicate. We use that pretty extensively with our clients, but there's lots and lots of those. There's Myers-Briggs and there's Berkman and there's the Harrison assessment and there's the colors. And experience at Intel was getting a better understanding of how you communicate your behavioral styles, regardless of what instrument that you use, really does help during these critical times. And we're using that extensively in our Leading Forward program with our clients around the world, and it works pretty well. One of the things that I'll also send to everyone at the end of this is that the company that provides that for us, TTI, they've done what's called a working from home report. And during this time, they've made it free, right? So you don't have to buy it. There's no sales or whatever. And because you've logged on to this webinar, I will send each of you a personal link to be able to do that. So hopefully it'll give you some ideas and some tools that you can use for yourself to work from home. Carlene, Trina, other thoughts?
Just one that I would add, and just be aware of how this whole time is triggering your own fears. So the next one. So there's a lot of subconscious fears that are being triggered by what we're going through as well. And so I know for me, when COVID first started, I went through a little of feeling even more anxious about it because of a fear of scarcity. So that is just one of those things. I was like, oh my gosh, how's this going to impact my business? How is it going to impact this? And then I was like, hyperventilating. And I went, oh, wait a minute. What part of this is COVID? And what part is this my own fear coming up? And my own fear is the scarcity fear. And I know that. So I just went, oh my God, this is me. And if I look at this, come on, Carlene, be logical. If it's really as bad as it looks like it's going to be, there'll be programs, right? There'll be programs for small business. Just stop it. so that I could just focus on what is the true part of the fear versus my own fear. But you're going to see people really being triggered by fears of like abandonment, right? Or rejection or manipulation and, you know, failure, weakness, whatever that is for them. And they will respond in a very different way. Just recognize that this is triggering some of that for people. And if they aren't as consciously aware of their own fear sources, they may not realize that this is not all COVID. This is also some subconscious fears for themselves. So it's a different way of looking at it.
I've also really thought about Stephen Covey's stuff of what is in my circle of concern versus my circle of influence, and really trying to manage my fear by going back to what are the actions I can take today that can affect my future, regardless of whether, you know, my Fidelity account goes to heck, or, you know, any number of things that are of concern every day, but I can't really do anything about. So believing that we have the resources and that we can come up with the answers, and being aware of what problems are mine to solve and what are problems for other people to solve that are way outside of my knowledge base, and trusting that they will, to try to calm myself.
So to keep everything on time, we've got about 2 minutes or so. I'll leave this contact information on the screen. Once again, you'll get this. If any of you have any closing comments or observations or whatever, we'll open this up while I leave this on. If you need to reach out to any of us, please feel free. Here's our contact information. Once again, you will get this, and then we will send out the invitation for the next upcoming sessions like these. These are really designed to be more working sessions than a webinar, to try to help you and understand your challenges. Any closing comments or questions for us before we let you go back to the real work?
I'd like to just hear if there were any tips that you all came up with in your small groups that you shared that would be really helpful for the larger group.
I would say I didn't hear a lot of tips. One thing that's worked for us is revisiting our core values, and making sure that putting that in our communications is familiar and it's grounding. Even though we're apart and separate, it's helped.
Good. That's so smart. This is an opportunity to either strengthen your culture or just crater it.
This is a situation we're hopefully never going to have again. Making the best of this to do some of the things that we know that we should have done, but are now forcing us to do that. So I think there's really great opportunity to rebuild the new normal, which we'll be talking about in future sessions. Okay, and with that, I would like to give the last 5 minutes to make this an effective meeting, so that we call meetings with purpose, so that you can get back and do the next phase of your morning. So thank you so much. We'll send this information out to you probably by the end of the day with a link to the session, and feel free to enjoy the day, and we will see you in a future session.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Y'all be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.